Good morning and welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Thursday, April 30th. Today we're reading Mark chapter 7, and it looks like we've stepped right into the middle of an argument, and it's one that we don't necessarily understand. Have you ever got caught up in a dispute between two people and you're not sure whose side to take, if any? This happens to me with some frequency, and I always say, well, let's go back to the beginning here to see if we can figure out what's at the root of all this. And the trickiest problems to solve are between people who've started off on the same foot, but then they've diverged somehow. With Jesus and the Pharisees, the root problem is how to be faithful to God. And the Pharisees and Jesus agree on a lot of things. Neither of them are thrilled with the way that the faith has gone. They're convinced the temple priesthood has become corrupted and that people have ceased to be interested in God's teaching and laws. Now, for the Pharisees, the way to get back on track was to look at the basic laws of God, the Ten Commandments, as well as all those little secondary laws you find in Exodus and especially in Leviticus. It turns out if you count them carefully, you come up with 613 laws, some of which we would find pretty obscure. A.J. Jacobs wrote a book a few years ago called The Year of Living Biblically, where he, as a non-religious person, tries to follow each of these laws for a year while living in New York. It's a great book and well worth the reading. What he discovers happens is every waking moment of the day is consumed with worrying about all these endless laws and regulations while his relationship with other people, wife, kids, friends, and family, begins to suffer from his legal obsessions. Exactly, says Jesus. Obsessive attention to the law is distracting you from the reason for those laws in the first place, he says, living a life pleasing to God and helpful to others. You're no longer living for God, but for the law, says Jesus. And the Pharisees have made God's law their God rather than their pathway and guide to living a life conscious of God, responsive to the love of God and to the needs of others. So the hand-washing argument, which begins in Mark 7, and these days it's hard not to root for the Pharisees when it comes to hand-washing, it's not really about hand-washing at all. Most arguments, especially between spouses, I've found, are seldom about the issue at hand. The argument is about losing sight of God by focusing on traditions. Have you ever heard someone say that Christianity is nothing but a bunch of rules? If not, maybe you should hang around teenagers more. We all know people who present Christianity as a collection of do's and don'ts rather than as a living, loving relationship of following Jesus. Imagine a fellow proposing to a girl by saying, now if we get married, I insist that you do all these things and that you never do all these other things. He'll probably get a no if the marriage is going to be about a collection of rules. No, instead he should say, I love you so much and I'm looking forward to loving you the rest of my life. Will you marry me? The way in which they then behave with one another for the remainder of their lives, their do's and don'ts will arise naturally from that love. That's what following God is like. That's what Christianity is. Remember Jesus' command? Love one another. That's what the Pharisees lost sight of, and that's what the argument is about. Jesus even makes a list. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. These kinds of things arise from an internal lack of love, not from following or failing to follow an external set of rules. Now, maybe to get a break from the Pharisees, Jesus, we're told, left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, but he could not keep his presence secret. Now, Tyre is in modern Lebanon, and in Jesus' day, as now, it was a non-Jewish area. Yet even here, Jesus can't get away. And you thought that that was only a modern cell phone era problem. A foreign woman somehow has heard about Jesus, managed to find him, and begs him to heal her daughter. And Jesus' response to her is shocking. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. In other words, my ministry is to my Jewish brothers and sisters, and I'm not done with them yet. You need to stand in line. But this woman is not easily dissuaded. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And then he told her, for such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter. Now, was this a test? Was Jesus testing the woman's faith? Or was he genuinely telling her to get lost and leave him alone? Matthew's retelling of the same event helps us out here. Yesterday I recommended that you read the passages in the other Gospels when they appear there. Not all do, but many of these stories can be found in at least one other Gospel. Matthew records this story in chapter 15, 21 to 28, and he portrays it as a dialogue primarily between Jesus and the disciples, who've asked Jesus to send the woman away. She keeps crying out after us. The healing of the woman's daughter is a lesson then to the disciples that none are unworthy of Jesus' help. Remember yesterday as well with the feeding of the 5,000, the disciples asked Jesus to send the people away, but he had compassion on them. Same thing here. Even a Syrophoenician woman is worthy of compassion and does not take second place to the people of Israel. Jesus does not send anybody away. Finally and briefly, the chapter closes with another healing of a Gentile fellow. Now, there's some things to note. Jesus uses saliva as a healing mechanism, as he does in John 9 with the healing of the blind man, and as he will again in our next chapter. As with the raising of Jairus' daughter, he speaks an Aramaic word, which Peter remembers and Mark translates, and the fame of Jesus spreads far and wide. It's interesting and not accidental, I think, that the healing of the foreign woman's daughter and the healing of the Gentile man happened in places that the Pharisees, the meticulous keeper of the rules, never would have gone, and it involved interactions with people with whom the Pharisees never would have spoken. In fact, the Pharisees would have referred to both the Syrophoenician woman and the deaf-mute man from the Decapolis as dogs. Jesus' words reflect this to make a point. Compassion, mercy, and love comes first. When rules become bigger, you've got to look at where your rules are pointing you. Now, tomorrow is chapter 8, which in some ways will seem like a rerun of the last few chapters. Another feeding, another healing, and Peter complaining again about there not being enough food. We'll see you then.